Hello, good morning. Welcome to the breakfast meeting here on NBS Television. My name is Isabella Jigme. This has been a fabulous week, and it's quite amazing for me that it's come to a close, but our discussions do not come to an end. It's 90 days of oil and mining from the 26th of August all the way until the 26th of November. This morning, our conversation is pertaining to the crude oil export pipeline and the refinery. The two, how different are they? What purposes do they serve? And of course, how Ugandans would benefit from these two. Joining me this morning to have a broader conversation in that regard is Mr. John Bosco Habumugisha, who is the General Manager of the National Pipeline Company Limited under EACOP, and also Michael Mugerwa, the General Manager of the Uganda Refinery Holding Company Limited, still with EACOP. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today?
Good morning.
How are you, Mr. Habumugisha?
Very good, thank you.
Hello,
It's a
Mr.
pleasure
Mugerwa.
to be here.
It's a pleasure to host you. Hello, Mr. Mugerwa.
Good morning.
Good
How are
morning.
you?
Fine, thank you. All right, so I'll start with Mr. Habumugisha. Please walk us through what you do and what your company does.
Thank you. Good morning, viewers. As you've heard, I have quite a long name, John Bosco Habumugisha. My colleagues call me JB just to save energy. We are in the energy sector. The Uganda National Oil Company, as you may be aware, is an integrated company that operates in the upstream, meaning the oil fields, which you know in the Lake Albert region. We have to produce the oil, we have to transport it, we have to refine it. So we are integrated. We do the upstream, we do midstream in terms of pipelines and refining. We also have to do the downstream in terms of supplying refined products to the market. So that is the Uganda National Oil Company. I'm a general manager of the National Pipeline Company, which is a subsidiary of EACOP, dealing with pipelines, terminals, transportation, and storage. That is my role, and I'm glad to be here.
I was glad to host you. Mr. Mugerwa, briefly tell us a bit about the Uganda Refinery Holding Company Limited and what you do.
Yes, so the Uganda Refinery Holding Company is another subsidiary of the Uganda National Oil Company. We have two major projects. One is the Uganda Refinery project that we're going to talk about in this program, as well as the Kabale Industrial Park, within which the Uganda Refinery project will sit, alongside the new international airport that's currently under construction. And so our responsibility is essentially to develop those projects, operationalize them, and once they're operational, to manage them. So that's how we are structured going forward.
All right. I'll go back to you, JB. Give us a brief background of the pipeline, its description, the major players, the finances, and of course, the project specifications.
The crude oil pipeline, which is coded the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, or the EACOP, is an enabler infrastructure. When you talk about oil and gas, you must talk about infrastructure. Oil and gas are global commodities, and you must be linked to the global market. If you don't, then what happens is that the global value is not available to you. Naturally, oil and gas will require a lot of infrastructure, and specifically now regarding the pipeline, when you are land linked, as we are in Uganda, to access the global market, you must establish either a pipeline or a rail system. Now, definitely, the cheapest way of transporting bulk petroleum globally is by pipelines. So we are developing this pipeline to ensure that the Ugandan oil market is linked to the global market. And the reality is that investors in the oil industry, when you talk about producing oil, you have to talk about how much investment is involved. The upstream is way above $8 billion. Now, anyone who is investing that amount of money wants to understand how quickly will they recover their money, what are the risk spreads. And that's why, finally, we had to negotiate with the industry to develop two market delivery projects, meaning the refinery and the pipeline, basically to spread the risk of the investor. As you might be aware, globally there is virtually very few, if any, countries that produce and refine all the oil they produce, basically because you need to spread the risk. And that's a challenge because when you're dealing with the global investors, they are looking at a global project profile. There are many oil development projects globally, and their outlook is to see where their risk is managed better. And we are glad that Uganda qualifies to be one of those destinations to attract that level of investment in upstream, in refineries, and in a pipeline.
All right. Mr. Mugerwa, can you kindly as well give us a brief background on the refinery as well?
Yeah, well, I thought I'd start by explaining what a refinery does. What we'll be doing is taking Uganda's crude oil, around 60,000 barrels per day of Uganda's crude oil, and refining it or separating it into different products. The products that we will produce will be gas, otherwise known as LPG. We'll produce petrol for local market, but also for regional market. We'll produce most of our diesel needs. We're going to produce jet fuel as well for Entebbe Airport, as well as the new airport that's currently under construction in Kabale. And finally, we'll have a very heavy product at the bottom called heavy fuel oil. The market for heavy fuel oil is very limited in Uganda, and so we will be looking to upgrade that to fertilizers, ammonia-based fertilizers, to support our agricultural sector. So the project is 60,000 barrels per day. The value of the project is in the region of about $3.5 to $4 billion of investment. Uganda government will have a 40% participation in that project. So that's a very significant investment as far as Uganda is concerned. The economics of that project are very attractive, primarily because we have an inland location, and we're sitting on top of our crude oil. So that means that we basically will be able to purchase that crude oil at a discounted rate. The products that we're producing are going to compete with imported products that are currently coming into our markets. Currently, we pipeline and truck in most of our petroleum products. All of our petroleum products, 1,200 kilometers. So that combination of trucking distance from the coast for petroleum products and the crude oil, the fact that we're sitting on top of the crude oil means that we have a very economical refinery, very attractive for investors, very attractive also for Ugandan investors. So the economics look very good. What's important from a value addition perspective for Uganda is that when you do perform value addition of basically any product, whether it's agricultural, but in this case it will be crude oil, is you're creating a lot of economic opportunity inside our nation. It means that we're going to create jobs. We're going to contribute to GDP growth. We're going to create opportunities for businesses in many of the service sectors that service the refinery, but also a lot of the downstream type markets. We will benefit, for example, if we look at gas, if we look at the gas sector, we will be giving opportunities to Ugandan companies in the logistics space. Currently, all petroleum product logistics, or most petroleum, let's say international, regional petroleum product logistics, are based in Kenya, are Kenyan or Tanzanian companies, but primarily Kenyan. But now we'll have an opportunity with this specific refinery to create, for example, an LPG distribution logistics opportunity for many companies that would now, Ugandan companies that would now be an exporter of LPG. So I think that kind of gives a high level descriptor of the project. The fuel specifications will be Euro 5, so basically compliant with everything that comes in currently into the East African market. So it'll be internationally the most advanced specifications that are out there that are being applied within East Africa. We have many parts of Africa actually have used Euro 4, even Euro 3 specifications, which have much higher sulfur contents and not so good for the environment. So we'll have a, basically top grade type of fuel available within the nation. We are doing this in partnership with a consortium called the Albertine Graben Refinery Consortium that is backed by a number of private sector investors, as well as Baker Hughes, which is an international oil field services company. So, significant players in the oil and gas industry that are participating in that project. So that's kind of a summary of the Uganda Refinery project. Very excited about the opportunity that it will provide to Uganda going forward.
I would like to go back to you, JB. Can you give us an update on the progress of the pipeline project in the aspect of investments, land acquisition, and the agreements?
Thank you. Now, in regard to investments, as we may be aware, the involved partners, we have Total, we have the CNOOC, Tullow was involved, but Tullow has since sold its interests to Total. And then we have the Uganda National Oil Company, represented by the National Pipeline Company at 15%. And we have the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation, which might come at 10% plus. These numbers are still being defined to fully integrate the shareholders who are to develop this pipeline. So in terms of financing, we are looking at 3.5 to 4 billion US dollars. Now that's a significant level of investment coming to the region compared to our GDP. When you talk about this level of financing, then you go into debt and equity ratios. We are still discussing at 60% debt and 40% equity. In that process, as a national oil company, our 15% equity is around 214 million US dollars. And then there is a debt component which we have to sort out. Shareholding, as you may know, we have the Ministry of Energy and also the Ministry of Finance. We are working with them to secure this financing well in time for the project to commence. Where we are right now, we will recall that we had an intergovernmental agreement. This is a transboundary project through Uganda and Tanzania. So we have an intergovernmental agreement for the two states to commit to the project, which was signed in May 2017. And as we speak, you also remember that we had to lay 3 markstones to define the project, one in Tanga, another one in Mutukula, and another one in Hoima. Now, once that was fully defined, we are now working on host government agreements. Now, these are the key agreements between the project and the states. So there's one in Uganda and one in Tanzania. We hope to finish this year, latest December. Now, once the host government agreements are done, and we have harmonized, some of the issues in Uganda have to be harmonized with the issues in Tanzania, things like movement of persons, aspects of local content, aspects that affect both states in terms of developing a project like this. Once this is done, we also have the tariff and transportation agreements to complete, because we are moving oil, and oil moves at a cost, which basically we use the word tariff. Currently, our number is at 12.77 US dollars per barrel, and it was one of the key elements that had to be negotiated to the highest level because you realize that that's a value that is taken off the barrel, and therefore the lower it is, the better for Uganda. Once that is fully defined, then we have the shareholders agreement as well between the project developers to ensure that the rights of each of the developers is clear, the roles, responsibilities, and the risks and the benefits. Now, that's agreements. There are other agreements, capacity rights in the pipeline, who should access this pipeline in the future, and the word normally is third-party access. There will be future fields that once oil is discovered has to be pumped through this pipeline by people who are not here right now. What are their rights of entry into this infrastructure? If we found another field in Tanzania, how do they connect into the pipeline? So those will follow. Then, of course, we have to do all the engineering work. Now, you'll recall that one of the key issues about a pipeline is you want it to be as short as possible. So the shortest pipeline is a straight line. But then you'll meet very many constraints that will make you shift the route of that pipeline. So we had to go through a process of engineering the route of this pipeline. That was completed. Some of the constraints include environmental issues. You'll meet lakes, rivers, you'll meet a difficult terrain. All these things had to be done. They are concluded. We are now in the middle of a detailed engineering process where you have to define the detail, the nitty-gritties. The word detailed engineering is all about the nuts and bolts of the engineering system for the pipeline system. Now, that is ongoing. We had a slight delay because of the key negotiations that I've mentioned, but that has also resumed. We have completed the resettlement action planning for the pipeline route. Just to mention that the length of the pipeline in Uganda is shorter. It's 296 kilometers. Now, that leaves most of the length of the pipeline, 1,147 kilometers, in Tanzania. The total length of this project is 1,443 kilometers. So most of it is in Tanzania, meaning most of the work is going to be in Tanzania. So in terms of local content, there's more activity in Tanzania than Uganda. But we have to remember that the oil, the benefits that come from the oil are Uganda. So that's where the key benefit is. So resettlement planning has been completed. The approvals from the chief government valuer have been achieved. Environmental and social impact assessments to ensure that the project is mitigating the impacts on the environment, on people, was completed, submitted to NEMA. We expect certification soon. Once you finish wrap the resettlement action planning and environmental impact assessments, those are some of the key processes that take time in a project like this. So these have been concluded. Once NEMA certifies, then we go into the actual implementation of the resettlement plan. We are talking about 2,740 acres of land. A pipeline basically requires a 30-meter wide corridor. And then you go through the various districts. We have 10 districts we are dealing with. Now, in every district you pass, already as we speak, there has been action. People have been employed to do the RAP. We have been having over 800 people working in this RAP process, and they are drawn from the various districts. Now, when you talk of 800 people, and you are talking about a year, you have to think about the logistics of moving these people, the accommodation, the security, the medical, and the feeding. Then you realize that already there are benefits that the various districts are already getting from this project. And that's just the beginning. Once we go into construction, the benefits will be much, much more. So that's where we are. The negotiations are critical. We are trying to finish them. Then we go into implementing the RAP. You know, this issue of project-affected persons is also another word that we need to understand when a project like this is being implemented, some people's land is taken, some people might be displaced in terms of their homes. Now, what must be achieved is to ensure that whoever is affected is compensated to a level that is equal or higher than where they are. And this is one of those projects that has significantly considered a higher level of status. If you are affected, you get a value that is higher than where you are. And the compensations have to be done promptly and fairly. Now, this issue of prompt and fair compensation is critical. Once you go through these evaluations, you want to ensure that people are effectively compensated. And that's one of the issues that we'll be focusing on soon. We expect construction to be beginning towards the second half of next year, because we have to conclude also the financing processes for the project.
All right. Mr. Mugerwa, kindly help us understand as well, as he has pointed out the progress with regard to the pipeline. Give us a status update with regard to the refinery project. What's the progress looking like?
Yeah, so I'm going to split that up into 3 work streams. We have a technical work stream, a legal work stream, as well as a financial or financing work stream. So from a technical perspective, at this point in time, we have commenced the environmental social impact assessment work. Essentially right now we are working on stakeholder consultations, doing some of the environmental baseline studies that are necessary, not just at the refinery project location in Kabale, Hoima district, but also there is a water intake corridor from Lake Albert, which is about 10 kilometers. And then there's a multi-product pipeline that moves 220 kilometers from the refinery all the way to Kampala Storage Terminal, which is based in Mpigi district. So the environmental baseline studies that are underway right now are encompassing that entire project area. Alongside the environmental work that's being done by the project developers, we are also very concerned and very focused on ensuring that the infrastructure available around the project to support it, to make sure that it will be successful, is also being looked at and developed. So, for example, the road infrastructure that would be needed to bring in some of the very heavy, abnormal loads, 200-ton loads of equipment and hugely oversized. These are, tractor trailers with 24 sets of axles, for example. So these moving at no more than 20 kilometers an hour, can you imagine, all the way from the coast. So we've got to really be concerned about the logistics corridors for such abnormal loads. So we are working very heavily engaged with UNRA, Uganda National Roads Authority, as well as the sister agency in Tanzania, TANRoads, to ensure that there are no bottlenecks for bringing in such equipment. So once we have the project built, of course, we've got to ensure that we're no longer importing 200 or so tanker loads a day of fuel from Kenya or Tanzania. We're now going to be producing that within our country, and it has to be distributed. So the road network within Uganda, starting from Hoima, has to be at a level that can basically sustain that kind of traffic in terms of the load-bearing capacity of these roads, but also from a safety perspective. These roads have to be specially designed because you're moving very, very hazardous products around the nation for distribution. We're also working on power infrastructure. We need power infrastructure at Kampala Storage Terminal, which is where the refinery will be sending most of its products. Probably 70% of its products will be sent into the Kampala region, but also up at the refinery project itself in Hoima district, we have to assure a very good and reliable power supply. So we'll be linking to the Karuma in Simba high voltage transmission system directly to the refinery to provide backup in case of power failure. So that's an idea of the the technical work. Some of the other more subtle aspects are access roads to the refinery that we still need to have built, designed and built. So we're doing that kind of activity at this point in time. When you look at the legal work stream, we still need to negotiate a number of agreements. Right now we're working on the basis of what's known as the Project Framework Agreement, which is an agreement structured to deliver the financing for the project, and as well as ensure that we have a bankable technical design for the entire refinery project. So that's the purpose of the Project Framework Agreement. And now, as we move towards what's known as an implementation agreement, which is a much longer term agreement from the time of when you start to negotiate the IA, the implementation agreement. So that's one of the key agreements that we have to work on. We have to work on the crude oil supply agreement. That will be an agreement between the oil companies and the refinery project for crude oil supply. And we also need to consider product offtake agreements. How are we going to market the products? All these agreements are necessary to assure the financing of the project. So when we look at that final work stream, there's a division of work between UNOC, Uganda Refinery Holding Company, on the one side, and the AGRC, the project developer, on the other side. Their responsibility is to raise 60% of equity. The equity estimation of this project is somewhere about $1.2 billion. So their responsibility is to raise 60% of that, plus all the debt for the project, because the debt will be about 70% of the total cost of the project, roughly. So as government entities, we are focused on raising the 40%, which is $480 million US, where, of course, Ministry of Finance is fully aware of this requirement. Cabinet is also very fully aware of this requirement, and we've been engaging, basically multiple engagements with the Ministry of Finance to look at the sequencing, when this money is required, and over what time period, and how is Uganda going to raise that money to ensure our participation in what I said earlier is a very, very profitable project. We're talking about returns, internal rates of returns in the high teens, in the more conservative scenarios, in the high teens, but possibly reaching 20% plus once you start looking at some of the base and optimistic scenarios in terms of how the project would progress. So that's a high-level update where we are. We intend to complete all the environmental social impact work by about August of next year, so it's another roughly 12 months from now that will be complete. Also the front-end engineering design, the FEED will be complete around that time, and our target is to achieve FID, final investment decision, which is the point at which all the investors agree that this project is highly profitable. We want to invest in the project, and we're committing funds to the project. And the target for that is essentially first quarter of 2022, when that FID will be taken for the refinery project itself. And then, of course, hopefully financial close will be another 6 months or so after that, when finally all the funds come together, including all the banks. They have committed, the equity investors have committed and made available funds so that the project can truly kick off. So that's where we are high level in that project.
All right, I really have enjoyed our discussion, but unfortunately our time is fast spent and I have a lot more questions for you, so I'll ask you to keep your answers as short as you possibly can so that we can go through all the questions. I'll start with you, Mr. John Bosco. Are there any opportunities for Ugandan companies on above-ground installations of the pipeline project?
Absolutely. There's a lot of values. And as I already mentioned, the value aspects are quite diverse. When you think about already the resettlement planning process that I mentioned, we've talked about 800 people that have been engaged in this activity, 800 and more. Now that's employment. There's going to be over 15,000 people during the construction phase of this project. And that part of that will be in Uganda. We are talking about people who need to be fed. When you talk about logistics and people, you're talking about transport, you're talking about food, security, accommodation. Already, as I have mentioned, just the resettlement planning alone has positively impacted hotels in the 10 districts. It has provided employment to people in those districts. It has provided security services, accommodation, medical. Now, project that to a period of 3 years during construction. These are activities that are going to increase. We have 4 materials camp yards that have to be constructed. Now, when you say materials, you have to move them, you have to store them, and you have to secure them. And all this is being done by people. So the benefits stretch beyond what we are calling a pipeline. Think about the people and provide the services that people need. People need accommodation, they need food, they need security, they need transport. So as I have already indicated, that is going to increase. Now, there is also supply of materials that are required by the project itself. When you talk about a pipeline, you have to do trenching. Now, in some sections where you find that it's rocky, you have to move sand of a specific grade to provide what I could call a bed for the pipe. And that has to be moved by Ugandans. There's going to be welding. As a country, one of the things that we have been preparing for is welders. Now, the welders we have today are not fully certified to the level required by a pipeline because of the standards involved. So we have a whole training process going on to ensure that we have welders that are certified for a project in oil and gas. And beyond the pipeline, welders are going to be required in huge numbers on the refinery, in huge numbers in the upstream. The upstream fields have a lot of flow lines, smaller size pipes. They feed into a larger pipe that then moves up to the refinery. So all these are welders. So the country is going to need certified welders that are ready for the industry. Of course, there will be some of the aspects that will require experienced welders. Normally, when you're welding a pipe, the first weld, which is called a root pass, you have to show that you have done it before. So that level of welding may require that we bring in a few experts to handle that. But beyond that, welders are going to be quite lucrative. And the effect is that when they have finished this project, a welder is a welder. Then the fabrication industry in this country will benefit beyond the pipeline. The standards required in oil and gas are quite high, even for food. Once the project is finished, that level of performance will positively impact the country. And you can keep going. So yes, there's going to be a lot of services. One of the things maybe I should talk about is the ICT. I think this is going to be the first time, and I don't know when it will happen again, when you have a trench that is running from the middle of our country and going all the way to the coast. Here we have an opportunity to link up with the subsea cables for ICT industry enhancement. The pipeline uses a system called a SCADA system, and so it needs an optic fiber all the way. How much capacity does the pipeline need, and how much can we lay along this trench? So we are working with the NITAU, with the ICT Ministry, to ensure that optic fiber cables are laid in this trench, and that will enhance the communication industry. So it keeps going. Security systems are enhanced in oil and gas. So there will be those who will be required for the industry, for the pipeline, and beyond. So there is a lot of enhancement we as Ugandans should not just think about a pipeline as a pipeline. All the requirements that we have around security, medical, transport, accommodation, we have to be prepared. Otherwise, the foreign investors will come and do it when we are watching as Ugandans. So I call upon Ugandans to prepare for this kind of industry requirements.
All right, Mr. Mugerwa, before I ask you about the opportunities there for Ugandan companies on the project's development and petrochemical industry that will be created, will the refinery change Uganda's downstream dynamics?
Well, the expectation is that certainly Uganda will benefit from being a local producer now of petroleum products. But to be specific, if we look, for example, at our current consumption of gas in the country, we're roughly about 30 metric tons per day of gas. The refinery, once it's up and running, say from 2026, will be producing 650 metric tons per day of gas. So 20 times our current national consumption. Of course, if you look further afield to Tanzania and Kenya, they're using in that region. They're using 800 metric tons a day, so significant quantities of gas for cooking. So we expect that essentially in the short term, in the medium term, say from 2026 onwards, we will probably be an exporter of gas to the region, and by that, and as a result of that, Ugandans will benefit from lower gas prices in that interim time. But as Ugandan consumption increases, then our prices of gas will start to balance out with the imports that need to come in. So it's always an import parity consideration. So I expect to see some benefits for Ugandans in gas, home cooking, which of course is a benefit to our trees, because we've got to really stop or significantly reduce tree cutting for charcoal for cooking at home. So gas is a big opportunity. We will be a regional exporter of petrol in the early days of the refinery, the early years. And so the refinery will enable us to probably see some slight reductions in petrol prices in the initial years. When we look at diesel, I think we'll probably continue to see the same types of pricing for diesel in that time period. So there will be some changes, but they're not going to be major. You see, the main cost component of our petroleum products, or a significant cost component, are the transport costs from the coast. And because we will be continuing to be an importer of some of these petroleum products, bearing in mind that our consumption rates are growing at 7, 8 to, depending on the product, sometimes 10, 12% per year for petroleum products. So we'll continue to have a dependence on imports balancing out. Now, if we look back to the first part of your question regarding opportunities for Uganda and the economy and companies in general, what we should remember is that our petroleum products imports reflect roughly 1/3 of our foreign exchange needs. So it's from a balance of payments perspective. I'm not an economist, I'm an engineer, but I can share with you what I've learned talking to very esteemed colleagues in this area. From 2026, overnight, will essentially eliminate a very significant part of our foreign exchange requirements by becoming a petroleum product producer ourselves. The resultant impact on the economy is that we're going to have a stronger currency. As a result of a stronger currency, it means that we're going to have to balance out, probably reduce interest rates. We should see significant reductions in interest rates from that time on, which will benefit the economy in general, because many entrepreneurs, many businesses at this point in time struggle with the high interest rates that we see in this country. Where the best interest rates you can get if you're in the agriculture sector in the 12 to 14% range. But when you start going overseas, those kind of rates are really credit card rates. It's not not a business type rate. You need to be, somewhere between 5 and say 8% maximum when you're looking at those type of rates. So we should see a significant benefit for the economy in general, which means that many businesses will be more able to borrow money and add value to the economy in other ways. Now, if we're looking at the refinery and its specific location, It's located within the Kabale Industrial Park, where we'll be having a heavy industry sector in there. I talked about fertilizers earlier, but we're also looking at plastics such as polypropylene, which would enable us to potentially go into automotive components manufacture and eventually even automotive assembly, which is already happening in Kenya and in Rwanda. So there's no reason why Uganda cannot do that. As government, we've pushed for Kira Motors, so we are going to be assembling buses locally, but at some point we should be able to also make significant contributions as automotive components, such as using, there's bumpers, there's dashboards, there's many components that you get from the petrochemical industry that we could potentially produce here as Uganda. All those heavy industries will require support in the supply chain from medium light industries. So we have locations in Kabale Industrial Park for that type of industry. Of course, mustn't forget we have an international airport. I don't know if you've visited, but at some point you should. It's a very interesting project. It's at 50% or approaching 50% completion. That project, once your beef picked up, it's got to be chilled. By the time it gets on planes for export, it needs to be pretty much frozen or chilled. I don't know if you're aware, but in Angola and Luanda, which is only three and a half hours flight from Uganda, imports somewhere between, depending on the year, but $800 million to $1 billion a year of frozen beef. This is another African country, 3 hours flight. Currently, they import all these products, believe it or not, from South America, from Brazil, due to historical ties. I mean, this is just the craziness that we're seeing in Africa, that we're not trading with one another. And these are the opportunities that Uganda is going to be able to harness, so that we'll be able to export to other African countries by air those type of high value products. There's lots of opportunities that I see coming down as a result of the refinery project, as a result of the oil and gas sector, that are sustainable in the long run. So all the infrastructure that the government has put in place related to oil and gas can be beneficial to other parts of the economy. And so that's really what we're seeing as big opportunities for Ugandan companies. So I'd mentioned them all: heavy industry, light medium industry, agro-processing. Of course, we're going to have to put in medical centers. There's going to be technical training institutes in there. So for capacity building, we have to add some secondary schools in the region, in that area. There's only a primary school, for example, in that particular sub-county. There's bigger opportunities that we see for companies. And as it is, many private companies are already in the area looking at purchasing land or even buying land to take advantage of these opportunities going forward.
Well, unfortunately, our time is fast spent, and as much as I am enjoying the conversation, all good things must come to an end. So I'll start with you, John Bosco. In under 30 seconds, what would you like the viewers to take home from the conversation we've had this morning?
Fellow Ugandans, COVID aside, we are in the middle of a transformational period. It's a time when, I'll tell you, I'm reading a book called Creating the Impossible by Mike O'Neill. Now, two seemingly impossible things are actually happening today. One, we are attracting towards $20 billion of investment in oil and gas that will affect many other sectors. Who would have thought that that would come to Uganda? Two, we are building the longest heated crude oil pipeline in the world. Who would have known that that would come to Uganda? But generally, when you are born at the hills of Mount Muhabura in Iksoro, and you grow up and you become part of this journey, and your name is John Bosco, nothing is impossible. But fellow Ugandans, opportunity only comes to the prepared. You must prepare to be part of this journey. Otherwise, the value flies away. So please prepare. Thank you.
Thank you too, JP. Mr. Mugerwa.
My parting shot is on the environmental side. I think as we develop as a nation, of course, we are going to increase our carbon dioxide emissions. We're going to have impacts into our beautiful ecosystem, our environment. And so I'd like to mention that we are also working closely with the National Forest Authority, with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, to look at ways that we can potentially mitigate the emissions that will come out of these new industries that will come into Uganda. One of them will involve straight planting of trees. The other will maybe looking at corporations to help restore tropical forests that are currently in the country, that are currently being basically destroyed. So I think that there's a big opportunity that this oil and gas industry will also bring to basically the forestry and agriculture in general, is what I mentioned earlier. So we shouldn't look at all these things as necessarily, that it's going to be a polluting industry. It can also mitigate that kind of pollution and help actually to restore some of the beautiful environment that we've lost as Uganda over the last decades.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was really nice having you. We're having a discussion pertaining to the oil reserves opted for two options. That is the crude oil export pipeline and the refinery. We got the status updates, the backgrounds, the progress, and the opportunities therein for Ugandans that will partake in it. Just in case you missed out on this discussion, it's 90 days of oil and mining on NBS TV from the 26th of August all the way until the 26th of November. This particular conversation will be uploaded onto our Next Media YouTube channel shortly after here. So just in case you want to rewatch and acquaint yourself with this particular sector, that particular clip will be uploaded onto YouTube. Good morning, God bless, and have a beautiful weekend. Once again, I am Isabella Habumugisha.